Good afternoon, everybody, and welcome to today's webinar about the Kickstart Scheme and what union reps need to know about it. I'm Anna from the TUC, and I'm joined by Kate Bell, also from the TUC. And we're going to have two external guests today. We've got Natalie with us at the moment, who is a workplace rep at Yorkshire Water, and we're hoping to be joined very soon by Anne, also from Yorkshire Water, who is from the HR department there. We're having a couple of issues getting her to connect, but we're gonna keep trying so that she can join as well and talk to us about the Kickstart scheme from an employer's point of view. So just our usual little bit of housekeeping before we get going. We do have live captions on today's webinar, and there's a green button underneath the video that says open live transcript. If you click that, you'll be able to watch the webinar with the captions. We've got a chat panel on the right hand side, and it's great to see some of you already introducing yourselves there. So please use that to exchange ideas and tell us where you're from. You can send a question for our speakers. So right at the bottom of the screen, there's an ask a question button. Please post them there. My colleagues will be in the chat panel posting links to any resources or information that might be helpful for you. Okay, so on with today. We're going to be talking about the Kickstart scheme. I'm going to leave most of the detail to Kate to tell you about, but it's you may have heard that it's a government-funded scheme for young people to try and get them into work. And it's available to people who are currently on universal credit. And we've decided to bring this webinar to you this month, partly because it's Young Workers Month, but also because it's a new initiative that we think that union reps should be aware of. So, first question I'm gonna put to Kate. Right. So, Kate, can you tell us a little bit, please, about what the Kickstart scheme is and on what we need to know about it?
Sure. Thanks, Anna. Hi, everybody. It's nice to sort of not really see you, but to see you in the chat. So as Anna basically said, the Kickstart scheme is a new government scheme, and what it's designed to do is create new paid 6-month-long jobs for young people. We know young people are those who are losing out most in the job losses, really scary figures we've seen, as many young people be made redundant in the last 3 months, as we saw in the whole previous year. So a massive challenge, and this is the government's response so far. They announced it in July 2020, and they said they want to support around 250,000 jobs of 6 months for people aged 16 to 24. As Anna said, any young person aged 16 to 24 and claiming universal credit, who the job centre says is at risk of long-term unemployment, is eligible for the scheme. But young people have to be referred by the job centre. On the employer side, basically what employers get is funding from the government to pay 100% of costs to employ someone on the national minimum wage for 25 hours a week. They also get national insurance contributions and pension contributions paid. And then the government has also said it will give employers £1,500 to set up support and training, which they call around support for young people on the Kickstart programme. So basically, if the programme works and it's just got up and running, the first places started in November, what it should be doing is offering 250,000 new jobs to young people who maybe have lost their jobs in the pandemic or haven't been able to find new jobs. Anna, do you want me to say a bit more about... Oh, go on.
Yeah, sorry, I was just unmuting myself. It took me a minute or two just to do that. So can you tell us a bit, please, Kate, about which employers can apply and how do they go about doing this?
Sure. So the scheme's open to kind of all employers, whether they're in the public or the private or the voluntary sector. But if the employer needs to have, each employer that applies needs to have at least 30 jobs that they can offer to Kickstart participants. If they haven't got those 30 jobs, they can go through an intermediary, and they're calling that a gateway. So basically, employers who want to be involved in the scheme, and we hope that many unionised workplaces are going to be involved in the scheme, need to get in touch with their local job centre, or the DWP have set up this tool which they're calling Spotlight. So you could Google DWP Spotlight, and that basically says whether you can where you can find kind of these intermediary organisations. So sometimes these are local councils, sometimes these are charities who are kind of acting as like a broker basically between DWP and employers when employers have only got a few vacancies. A few things it's really important to note that employers have to do. So they have to show that they're new jobs which don't replace existing or planned vacancies, and they have to show that these aren't jobs which are causing existing workers to lose or reduce their jobs. And that's really, really important, of course, for us as trade unions. So it's absolutely vital that these are additional jobs. The employers have to show when they apply for these jobs what the extra support they're going to give participants on the scheme is. We think this is a little bit light touch. Maybe I'll say a bit more in a minute about what we wanted to see from the scheme. But employers do have to show that they're going to be giving the young people what they've called employability support, and that they've got a plan in place basically to support them. And they've got to give some evidence that the jobs they're offering are what the DWP has called quality placements. One of the things we're a bit worried about is we haven't really seen how the DWP are monitoring that, but at least they have kind of put those tests in place that the jobs have got to be additional, they've got to be offering young people support, and they've got to be kind of quality jobs.
That's great, Kate. Thank you. Before we move on to some of the TUC asks about the scheme, we've had a question that I think is relevant to answer now. Does the scheme apply only to England, or is it the whole of the UK?
It's the whole of the UK, I think.
Okay, that's great.
Because Job Centre Plus is across UK.
For all four nations.
Four nations.
Yeah, so we've also posted in the chat panel a link to the TUC guidance, which has got a lot more information and detail about this, and expands further on some of the things Kate has already mentioned. So, Kate, you suggested that you've got some TUC concerns about it already, but what are our asks, and what should we be thinking about when dealing with this scheme?
So there's a couple of levels I wanted to talk about this here. One is kind of what we're asking government to change about the scheme, and then one which is set out in the guide as well about what we think union reps should be talking to their employers about when they're thinking of taking this scheme up. So kind of at the national level, we're trying to push government to be a bit clearer about these being good quality jobs, being a bit more stricter about making sure that there is high quality training built in, and also that these really are additional jobs and are going to be of real value to the community. At the moment, we don't think government's done enough to kind of really get the public sector involved and to kind of use kind of the power of local government, for example, to create these jobs. And, you know, they're relying quite heavily on the private sector at the moment. And then the other thing we want government to do at a national level is to make sure we've got the right kind of equality monitoring in place. We know that sometimes in these programmes, the kind of discrimination we see in other bits of the labour market, whether it's against women with children, for example, whether it's against people of colour, or whether it's against disabled workers, sometimes gets replicated in these programmes. So we want the government to be monitoring it really carefully to make sure that people are actually getting the support they need. But we also think there's some kind of key things for unions to negotiate in their workplaces where a Kickstart scheme is being run. So obviously Kickstart participants should have access to a trade union. And we think actually this could be a really good union recruitment opportunity if people are able to kind of talk to those new young people coming into the workplace, talk to them about the kind of support that a union provides. We think union reps should be negotiating for Kickstart participants to be paid a living wage or to be part of the collectively bargained pay rates. Government's funding the national minimum wage, but you know, these are basically young people that the employer is getting to take on at very, very little cost, and we think they should be topping up those wages so that the young people get a decent rate. We think it's really important that people are looking at the type of training that young people are getting within their own workplace, and that it's good quality and kind of tailored, not just, you know, here's how to write a CV. And it's also important that these jobs are kind of future-proofed, basically. So what's the progression route for young people when that 6 months ends? And, you know, we don't want to see this as a kind of revolving door. We've got some more kind of tips in the guide, basically. So can young people get access to a mentor might be one important kind of thing that employers could think about. What's the specific support to make sure this is a positive experience for the young people? But I think getting access to unions and topping up to a living wage are absolutely vital things that we can be negotiating in workplaces where these placements are in place.
That's great, Kate. Thank you. I understand that Anne is still trying to join us. She's going to try on a different device. So what I thought would be good is, while we're waiting for her, is if I put a couple of the questions to you that have come in that I think are, might be relevant. So you mentioned gateway organisations, and we've been asked can you give a little bit more info on these gateway organisations? Is there a list available?
So I haven't seen a list of all of them yet, but the Spotlight tool that I mentioned from DWP is where you should be able to look up the gateway organisations in your local area. Some of these organisations, like we know Liverpool Council, for example, is acting as a gateway. I know Camden Council as well. So sometimes it'll be the local authority. Sometimes it might be charities like Groundwork, I think, one of those which are acting as a kind of gateway organisation. But unfortunately, the government has not set out a consistent approach to this throughout the country. There's both had to be a kind of application to be a gateway organisation as well as then an application to join the gateway. So, we suggested that government did this all through local authorities. They have not gone down that route, but it does mean it's slightly harder to work out, what your local organisation is.
Sure, but hopefully we can look at the Spotlight tool that you mentioned. It's just been posted in the chat that Leeds City Council have also listed as one of these gateway organisations. So hopefully there'll be more joining as time goes on. Okay.
One thing actually, sorry, I just wanted to add was that it's really important. We're really keen to get feedback basically on the scheme from unions. So I think we've set up a kind of form so that we can collect feedback, and hopefully colleagues will post that in the chat. But this scheme has just started, basically. The first placements went live in November. So there's about 20,000 placements live, allegedly, according to DWP at the moment, due to be about 250,000. What we're really keen to do is to get feedback from reps, feedback from anyone about how those placements are going, so that we can feed that back at a national level too and make sure the programme is as successful as it can be.
That's great. So you mentioned that employers should be one of the TC askers that employers should be topping up to the living wage. We've got another question about a similar sort of area. So the scheme talks about 25 hours of work a week. What safety rules are in place, or do you think we should be fighting for if people are being asked to go above that? What's the procedure there?
That's a really great question. And I guess, obviously, employers can offer more hours if they want, but it's really important to check that people are not working over the hours for which they've been paid. That's kind of, normal working time regulations, pay slips, basically. People should be getting a pay slip. And another really important reason why it's vital these young people get access to a union who can explain to them, this is how you check your pay slip to make sure that the hours you worked are the hours you're getting paid for too.
That's great. And I think that's a really nice moment actually to move on to hear from Natalie, who is a workplace rep. As I said, oh, sorry, bit of a technical issue there. We're still hoping to get Anne, who is from the HR perspective at Yorkshire Water shortly. But while we're waiting, let's hear from Natalie, who is a rep at Yorkshire Water. So first question for you, Natalie, why is it important that reps are involved in negotiations on Kickstarter, and what has been your experience so far?
Yeah, so it's been really important for us to be negotiating with the employer at Yorkshire Water based on the Kickstart scheme, because certainly from my point of view, the most important thing is that the 30 jobs will go ahead for 6 months, but then there will be jobs available afterwards. So that's something obviously that I'm very keen on, that it is made available from the employer. So what we're going to do during the period that we use every month with our contact with the employer to see how it's going, and as soon as possible give people job security. I think it's also important as well in regards to the living wage. So the discussion has been held with the employer at Yorkshire Water, and a decision will be made on Friday. So unfortunately, I just can't answer that question today to whether that is going ahead. But the one thing that we have got at Yorkshire Water is a living wage employer. So that's something that I'll certainly be pushing on behalf of the people that will be coming in on the Kickstart scheme.
That's great. Thank you, Natalie. So you've talked about the pay, but what other issues form part of the discussions that you had with the employer when you were having them?
Yeah, so one of the things that we're going to do, certainly from, because I'm a convener at Yorkshire Water within Unison, and what we're going to do within Unison at Yorkshire Water is, at the moment, our branch, any apprentices, we pay their fees as it's £10 a year. So what we've agreed is, as part of the Kickstart scheme, is that we will pay the union fees while they're in their 6-month employment, with the hope that the people who are joining the scheme will see the benefit of being in a union, and also the benefit of the support that they can receive from my branch to support them throughout. Then when they move into a full-time paid role, they will continue then with their union membership.
That's a really interesting starting point, I think, and perhaps something we could, that other people could see if they could implement that as well. So what other advice would you give to reps who want to do this in their workplace, and what suggestions that they can make to the employer while they're talking about it?
Yeah, absolutely. So the suggestion that we put to the employer was that the people, because it's a minimum of 30 people that they will take on, I'm hopeful it will be more, and there'll be different cohorts. But the one thing that I would suggest is that you get the agreement that everybody that comes in on the Kickstart scheme is to be part of a union, and that it's explained to people, the value of being in a union. Get your reps out there, get your branch secretaries, putting details out to the members that are joining, explaining what a union is, because we're very conscious, there might be young people that don't even know what a union is and what they actually stand for. So, get out there, talk to them. At the moment, we're in a bit of a situation where everything's on Teams or we're doing it virtually, but it's really important to invite them. So I'm planning, certainly within my branch, as soon as we get the first cohort in, that we bring them in and we explain the value and what the union stands for and what the union actually is, because some people just do not know, if the younger end. So, and hopefully then at that point, they will see the value, and then obviously continuing the negotiations within my branch, working with the employer. Hopefully at the end of it, my view is that I hope at the end of it, 30 people will be in 30 full-time roles, and then we will continue on to a second cohort. So that's certainly my view on it at the moment.
I think that's a great aim to start the scheme with. And yeah, you've mentioned there, Natalie, a couple of issues that I think all reps in a huge range of workplaces are facing, not just at the moment, but all the time. Yes, we're doing everything virtually for reasons we all know about, and that is a kind of added layer, an added hurdle perhaps to getting new colleagues involved in the union. But also I think even if you were in the workplace, you've touched on this idea that not everyone knows what a union is, or what the benefits are and how they can be involved, and these are all issues I think that we can apply to lots of different situations. So that leads me into my next question. As I said earlier, it's Young Workers Month. So what other suggestions have you got for recruiting members who are under 25?
Yeah, so I'm very fortunate as a branch that I have a young members officer. So if you do have young members officers within your branches, absolutely use them to go out and talk to members and probably familiarise yourself with problems that they may face as a young member, as a branch. So not just leaving it down to the officer. Going out and talking to people, understanding what issues they may be facing, etc., is absolutely key in communication with our branch. And I think the one probably just to finish off is that people always like freebies as well and little goodies. So if you can get some things out to them just to give, and that's obviously not the be all and end all of it all, but getting out there and actually understanding the issues that young workers are facing.
Yeah, absolutely. We've done numerous kind of, webinars, guidance about organising with younger people. If you looked at our back catalogue of webinars, there's all sorts of information on there. We could do like a whole series of them. But that's great. Thank you, Natalie. There's some really interesting points there. I'm still trying to connect with Anne. I'm not really sure what the technical issue that's stopping her from joining, but we are still trying. However, we've got some questions that I can put to you both in the meantime. So we've had a good question that's just come in. Kate, I think this one perhaps would be for you. What support is there for disabled young workers to access the Kickstart scheme? Do we know of any? And what is there if there is?
Yeah, I haven't seen, and I know there's colleagues on the call who might have done. I haven't seen anything specific for disabled young workers yet. We assume that Kickstart workers would also be able to access to work funding, like any other worker who needs additional support within the workplace. But I haven't seen any kind of tailored programs. And I think one of the interesting things for us to look out for is Job Centre Plus has been given some more money over the course of the pandemic. It's been given they've said they're going to double the number of work coaches. And today the Chancellor, it was the spending review, as probably most of you saw, mostly not good news, but they did announce kind of additional money for back to work support, a £3 billion programme over 3 years. As far as I know, none of that's been targeted specifically to disabled workers. And given the structural discrimination we know disabled workers face in the workplace, that seems like something that's really missing. So I think that's definitely an area for us kind of as the TUC to keep pushing on, basically, to suggest that there are disabled workers who might need additional support to be able to take up these placements. And as I said, we have asked government to kind of monitor the equality impacts, and that will be a really important one to see if people, whether people are able to access these opportunities.
Sure, and that leads me to a question from me, really. You said that we're monitoring it. What's the kind of timetable for review and any changes that the government might want to make to the scheme? When might we see those?
Well, they haven't set out a kind of formal timetable, and we're trying to talk to them when we can about feedback. I think it's probably too early now to assess whether the scheme is a success, but maybe kind of January and February in the new year, when the scheme should have been running for, that will be November, December, January, end of January, is when we might want to start saying, well, how many placements actually are there, who's accessing them, how's it going, and then the government is planning a budget in March, so that would seem like a critical point in which to kind of raise that issue.
Are you still there, Kate?
Yeah, I'm there. I've just stopped talking.
Yeah, sorry, lost you for a second. Okay, another question that's just come in. What criteria do the young people need to meet to ensure that they are referred by the Job Centre to the scheme?
So this again, we'd said to DWP when they set this up, you need some really clear criteria. So it's not just kind of who the work coach happens to like. Unfortunately, that hasn't been set out. So they have said it's young people aged 16 to 24 at risk of long-term unemployment. I don't know if there's any kind of PCS colleagues on the call here who will obviously be delivering some of those services, and we know the work coaches in the kind of job centre will do their best to match up those opportunities. But I think one of the things we might want to be monitoring as well is who's getting access to this scheme, who actually is being referred, and making sure that that's being done in a fair and transparent way. And also that if there are many applicants, because what we're hearing at the moment actually is that there's many more applicants than there are placements, possibly because of the some of the kind of slowness of getting the placements up and running, that there's a fair process for deciding who gets to access those schemes. So that process might look at what are the barriers the person faces to get into the labour market, how long they've been experiencing unemployment. But at the moment, we haven't seen that guidance. Although, of course, as I say, there might be colleagues on the call who have access to it.
Sure. I think I saw a PCS person zoom by a few minutes ago. So we'll see if they're still on, and maybe they can join on the chat with some of those with some of the points you've raised, Kate. Right. I know I keep saying this, but we are still trying with Anne. While we do, Natalie, I wonder whether one of the questions that we were going to put to Anne, we could perhaps ask you. Now, obviously, I'm not going to ask you to speak on behalf of Yorkshire Water because that's not the role you're hearing today. But if you do, you know at all what first made Yorkshire Water interested in the scheme? Was this something that perhaps came up in your discussions with her as a rep?
Yeah, so it didn't originally come from us, to be totally honest. So Yorkshire Water in the past have done different types of schemes. So they have done schemes similar to this in years gone by. Now, it did come up, and as soon as obviously we heard about that Yorkshire Water were interested in, we approached the employer straight away to get involved. So obviously we can work collaboratively throughout the process, so that we can make sure that people will be looked after, people will have that sort of support all the way through. And that's really, really key for us, that people that are coming in that may have not even had experience in workplaces, you know, are supported all the way through when they have places to go.
Yeah, that's great. Thank you, Natalie. It's really interesting to hear that this is something that Yorkshire Water have, obviously not this scheme before, but they've done similar things. What do you know? What in the schemes in the past that may be similar ones, and this one, that the kind of benefits that it brings to the employer? Is this something you've been able to see evidence of in your role?
Yeah, absolutely. So we've actually supported a scheme such as this in the past, and it was for people that was going that may have had different kinds of disabilities that we supported through the past. So what we did was we went straight to the employer, spoke to the cohort guys at the time, and we discussed it with those about the union membership, etc. And what we've seen through that is they were supported in a placement, and they've gone on now out into the business in full-time jobs, which is always great for us.
Yeah, absolutely. It starts as a short-term thing, and then it becomes a kind of a permanent job. Okay, I'm going to put another couple of the questions that have come in to you both. Do we know, is there a probation period built into the 6-month programme, or any other kind of regular start of employment type scheme? I don't know who wants to answer that. Who would it fall more naturally to?
I think one of the things that employers are being asked to set out is, what guidance when they apply to host placements. They're being asked to set out what support they're going to provide to the young people, and that will obviously be part of it. And young people will be on a regular contract of employment when they're on the Kickstart scheme. We'd offered to, I know I'm doing a lot of moaning about the fact that DWP haven't taken up our suggestions, but we'd offered to kind of write a standard contract basically for young people on Kickstart placements. They haven't taken that up, but I think it is important to note that these young people are employed basically. So all kind of normal HR processes, probation periods, regular reviews with your manager, anything you'd expect from a normal job should be being applied to these young people so that they get a decent work experience. I mean, one thing I was just thinking about is obviously it's a particularly difficult time to support work right now, to start work right now. It's very, very weird to, one day you're sitting in your living room having your breakfast and the next day you're sitting in your living room and you're at work, basically, for many people. Although, of course, there's obviously lots and lots of people working outside in the economy as well. And it, like Natalie was saying, that seems to me to be a real selling point to employers for involve your union as an offer to support young workers who, might not have had an experience of work, almost certainly won't have had an experience of working online. And I think it's another thing that, we can really offer as part of our kind of, this is why these young workers need to access unions.
And just probably to add to that, and not answering on Yorkshire Water's behalf, but something that I have discussed with the employer is the wraparound support for the cohort when it comes in. So monthly catch-ups, that they've got a clear guidance on who they can go to, who can support those. So I know that is being put into place. What we've also offered up, certainly from our branches, to do some workshops which are delivered by my union reps to the cohort in regards to any problems they may be experiencing within the role, whether it be, looking at CV writing, whatever it may be that we can support with. We've offered up to do the workshops, which will be, as I say, led by our union reps.
That sounds brilliant, Natalie. Like lots of support, not just for the job role, but a kind of holistic approach, which I think will benefit all. I'm just looking at the other questions that have come in to see if we've covered most of them. Just 1 second. Yes, so we've had a question which I think we've covered, but I'll let you both add to it if you want, if you had any more detail. So should unions be looking to support Kickstarters to move on to a job or an apprenticeship in their organisation? I think we've already covered that, yes, that is the case. But Natalie, in particular, is this something that you've experienced in the past where people have done this, and what ways have you worked with the employer in order to enable this to happen?
Yeah, so what we did, it was a couple of years ago now, in regards to a previous cohort that came in. What we did was we signed everybody up to the union as we've done this time, and offered to pay their fees throughout their placement. And then obviously as part of that, people started coming to us when they were getting a bit nervous when the placements were coming to an end. That then gave us the opportunity to go and negotiate on their behalf with the employer in regards to full-time work. And I'm very pleased to say that they have got full-time roles and they've been in the business for about 4 years now, which is absolutely great. We see them on a regular basis. So, that is certainly my view, being in a union, we resolved that for them and they were very pleased. So
that sounds great, and really positive outcome. Okay, Kay, I think the next question's for you. Are there any checks in place to ensure that that the grant to support is actually used in the right way to support the young person's employability and training, the kind of checks and balances for the employer?
That's a really great question. As far as we know, there's a set of kind of questions the employer has to answer to get access to the scheme in the first place. So they've got to set out what they're going to do. I don't know whether there's then going to be a series of kind of spot checks of, is that what the employer actually did? But I think a good thing for kind of union reps to be asking to have it is, what was the employer's original application, basically? So to ask to have a look at, well, what did you say you were going to do? And then union reps can play a role in saying, well, hang on, we said these people were going to get, 5 hours training a week in addition. We said they were going to have the opportunity to try out different bits of the business. You said they were going to have a mentor. Have you delivered this? So I think it's that initial application document that the employers put in to get the money that's a really important kind of checking point, if you see what I mean.
Sure. So the reps are providing a bit of a checking point. So absolutely, Natalie.
Yeah,
go ahead.
Yeah, just to add to that, so obviously Yorkshire Water is still in the process of putting the criteria together and working it all out, what it means. It is to be signed off on Friday. So obviously as part of that, they will be coming to us to negotiate to make sure everything is covered. So, it's really great that union reps are involved, because we get to see that before the criteria is actually put in place to make sure it will be a fair process.
Sure, absolutely. I think we've probably got time for one, maybe two more questions. But before we do that, just to say, I don't think now we're going to be able to have Anne join us, which is I'm still trying. But these things happen. You can't always get around firewalls, etc. Poor internet connections. It's modern life. However, Anne has very kindly said that she is happy to do some written answers. We had some prepared questions for her. So what we'll do is we'll send them to her, get her to write write some short answers, and we'll include that to everyone who registered for today's webinar. We'll send out Anne's answers to those questions along with the video that we're recording now, and links to any other resources. So it's a real shame Anne couldn't join us, but it doesn't mean we won't hear from her, which I think is great. We can still do that. Okay, so a question here that's it's an interesting one, really. The age group for the scheme is narrower than the one that many trade unions use for the idea of young workers. So do we think that there's a scope here, perhaps this one's for you, Kate, whether unions or, can we request a widening of the age criteria of the scheme? It is pretty, 6 years, 7 years, it's quite narrow.
Yeah, we certainly pushed for a scheme for older but still not old workers to be in place as well, and actually we thought that this kind of supported job scheme should be in place for all workers who are facing long-term unemployment. We have just seen that new money announced from government today about they're calling it the Restart Scheme, obviously, so it sounds like Kickstart. I think one of the things we might be pushing is for some of that money to go on a scheme that's a bit like Kickstart but supports older workers and builds on some of those lessons, because we know that one of the best ways to get people into work is to give them the opportunity to work. It makes sense. So I think there's an opportunity there for us to push that.
Yeah, it does sound like a separate scheme for the older age band. Let's see how many times we can get Start into a new initiative. Yeah. So we've just had another question, which I think is again quite an important one. Can an employer dismiss a Kickstart worker if they're deemed not suitable for a role?
So I think basically this is where it kind of comes down to the normal employment deal, basically. So it should depend on what's in their contract. It's not you can just let this person go because you don't like their face on the day they turn up. But it should be following kind of normal employment law. But that, again, is why it's so important they get the support of a union rep, so to make sure that the employer isn't just kind of treating them like, oh, sorry, you weren't what we expected, off you go.
So just based on that, obviously in previous schemes that we've supported on, if there has been that situation, what we have done is we've negotiated on behalf, if the job won't right for them, for instance, or they had problems within the role, what we have done is negotiated on their behalf and got them moved into different roles that were suitable for them. So it's not just a see you later from the company.
Yeah, that sounds like an excellent outcome for all. These really great I think, examples of a good experience there. Just a couple of things that have just come in on the chat. Yeah, thank you for the viewer who's kindly told us it's a 9-year age range. I can't count, clearly, that's fantastic. And we've also had a message from Anne, who was supposed to be joining us. So it's no worries, Anne, please don't apologise. These things happen. And we will, I don't know whether you caught me saying a couple of minutes ago, we will send you the questions we've prepared, and you can write us some answers. So I think we've just got one more question here that touches on something that you mentioned earlier, Natalie. So you mentioned support for disabled workers. Is existing government support for disabled workers, such as an access to work grant, available to employers using the Kickstarter scheme? Kate, you touched on this earlier as well, but is it something that they can get for both grants for the same person? So, Kate, do you want to go first on that? Sorry.
I don't actually know the answer to that. So I think that's probably a good one for us to come back and check, rather than for me to make up the answer.
Sure, no, absolutely. And I think what we found is useful with these webinars is that people often raise points that because this is a new thing we don't know about, and it's great to I think help us make guidance clearer, and so that we get the right information out to people is responding to the questions that they ask. Natalie, did you want to add something there?
I did, yeah. So obviously Anne can't be on the call today, but something that we did discuss earlier is, as we go through the programme, we will do some guidance documents based on best practice on collaborative working within with the trade unions and the employer. So that's something that we will work on. Obviously, it's not going to be done for a few months until people have hopefully embedded into their roles, but that's something that, we're willing to send out through the TUC.
That sounds great. We'll definitely keep in touch with you on that one, Natalie. So that, as I think we've covered quite a lot of information there about a scheme that's brand new, and like Kate said, we're kind of learning about this all the time. It's very early days, weeks of it, so we'll get lots of information as it develops and as it rolls out with employers. We update our information that we put out to reps via our website all the time, so do keep an eye on that. As we said, we'll be sending a recording to today's webinar along with all the resources that we've mentioned and those questions from Anne. But it'll be tomorrow, just to give her a little bit of time to answer those. We don't want to, have her spend all evening on it. Do tune in again for a future webinar. Thank you all for joining and for posing some really insightful questions. It's just bye from all of us today, and we'll see you again soon.
Thank you.